I've recently had some students contact me and say that they're having some assignments dealing with named ranges and so-called database commands, and they don't really understand what it is that they're doing. So in this video, I'm going to try to run through the idea of named ranges and these database commands to make sure that you have a good foundation for what it is you're doing and how it all works. We'll also do one or two little basic examples of a VLOOKUP, although I do have some other videos dealing with VLOOKUP, and I can make some additional ones in the future if you want. Now in a little while, we're going to be using some data here. This is some data on characteristics of mothers here, their age, height, weight, and whether they smoked, and some characteristics of newborn babies, birth weight, and how long the baby was in the womb, gestation, how many days. Parity is whether it's a first child, 0, 1, it's not a first child. And then just an ID number here for rows. Before we dive into working with real data, let me just do some basic things with named ranges to kind of get our feet wet so we understand the basic ideas. Please download this Excel worksheet. I'll have a link in the video description so that you can work along with me. Let's click on this second tab called Named Ranges, where let's just practice with some basic ideas here. So named ranges are good for when you're going to be working with the same data again and again, so you don't have to keep highlighting the same data over and over. For example, here's some made-up data on some grades. If I wanted to calculate the average test grade, one way to do it would just be to say equals average, and then highlight that data, and then hit enter. And we have the average. But what if I know for these test grades I don't want to just calculate the average? What if I want the median and the minimum and the maximum and to do a lot of things with it? Then instead of having to constantly type a formula and then select or type out the range, we can give it a name so that we don't have to remember the cells or highlight the cells. So here's how we can make a named range in the easiest way. Just highlight the data that you want to work with, and you can sometimes include the name. Sometimes it's more appropriate to just highlight the numbers. I'll highlight everything here. So test 1, and we come over here to the name box. See how when we hover over that, it says name box. This is where you can type and work with names. So just click in the name box, and it's highlighted D1 because that's the last place I clicked. We're just going to type over it, and we can call this test 1, or we could call it anything else. But keep your names simple. So names can't have spaces, you don't want to have punctuation in there, although periods are okay. So we could call this test 1, or we could call it test.1, or test_1. Let's call it test_1, just so we know that we can name it something different from what's in the column header there, okay? And then after we're done typing the name, we just hit enter. Okay, so highlight what you want to name, click in the name box, type the name, hit enter. And now if I want to do the average, equals average, we can just type test_1. And same thing. But we could also do equals minimum. I want to know the lowest test score, test 1. And we could do the maximum, we could do the median, etc. And it's just a little bit quicker way to deal with data. Let me just give you another example. Let's do another named range, and let's call it, say, grade 1, or it could just be grade. I'll call it grade 1. So grade 1, enter. Another function we could use that's interesting is COUNTIF equals COUNTIF. And then we can say, what data do we want to work with? Well, that was that grade 1, comma, and then the criteria. And here the criteria needs to be in quotation marks. So we can say, I want to count up the grades that are a C. Begin quote, C, end quote, and then hit enter. And it tells us that there were 3 students with C's. 1, 2, 3. We could also do a similar kind of thing, equals COUNTIF. And let's work with the test 1 data here, comma. And the criteria here could be, I want all the grades that are bigger than 75. So begin quote, greater than 75, and hit enter. And it tells us that there are 6 grades bigger than 75. 1, not that one, because that's equal to 75. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Very useful stuff, right? Now let me show you one last thing that is really cool to do with named ranges, and that's the VLOOKUP formula. I'm just going to do one basic example here of a VLOOKUP. Suppose that here are the grades in your grade book, and then somebody else hands you some other grades that you want to add to your grade book. So down here we have the grades for test 2, and this might be coming from a Scantron program, or a TA emails you this. In order for VLOOKUP to work, we have to have some kind of matching identifier. It could be name, as long as these names are unique and no two students have the same name, or we could use their ID number here. So let's use ID since that's what we have here. Here are the steps to use VLOOKUP. First, we need to give a name to this table that we're going to be looking into to find these test grades. And the first column has to be the thing we're matching on. So the first column on the left has to be the thing we're matching on. So let's highlight this and let's give it a name. T-match for test match or whatever we want. T-match. And hit enter. Now we go up here and let's type test 2. And we want the test grades for each of these IDs to be put in the correct place over here. So equals VLOOKUP. And the VLOOKUP formula I remember in my head as VLOOKUP, what do I want to look up, where do I want to look it up, and what do I want to return? Those are the three key things that you have to put in there. What am I looking up? Well, I'm looking up the ID, right? So I want to look up the number 16288. Where do I want to look it up? Well, down in this table below, and we called that T-match, so comma, T-match, comma, column index number is what it wants. What you want to return is the second column. We could return the ID, but we already know that. So we're going to return the second column. So we put the number 2 here, comma, and then it wants true or false. Do we want an approximate match or an exact match? We don't want an approximate match because then if it finds something kind of similar to this ID number, it'll match it. We want an exact match. We only want the match, if it exists, for this exact student. So we could type false here for exact match, or 0 is a quicker way to say false in Excel. I always like to double check, did it do the right thing? So 16288 was a 72, right? And then now we can just copy this down, and we have all those test scores matched to the correct student, and it didn't take us any time at all. Let me show you some other things you can do once you have these named ranges. So I could be on a different worksheet altogether. And suppose I want to go look at those test grades again. You can click the name box, the little drop down arrow, and you can click, say, grade 1. And it'll take you to that tab, to that data. So it can be on any sheet. So it's a good way to navigate, to get back to places that you commonly want to go. What if we want to delete a name and we don't want to use it anymore? Or if we want to edit it, we can go to Formulas, Name Manager. Now we can also use this to define names. It's just a slower way of doing it. But if we click Name Manager, it shows us all the named ranges that we've already created. And if we want to get rid of those for some reason, maybe we're going to go work on another tab now and we don't want to have these names conflict with some other names we might create, we can delete them. However, let's close that. Here's something I always do when I'm doing something like this in my grade book. Because these test grades here, this isn't really the number 72 in this cell. This is a formula that is constantly going to be looking in this table, right? For some reason, I accidentally mess up this table, like if I hit 0 here, it's going to put 0 in this cell for this grade. And I don't want that. So what I usually do, so once I got the correct match, it's going to stay there. I select it and I right click and go copy. I right click again and go paste values. So it's the little number 1, 2, 3 here, paste values. Now if we click in one of those cells, it's just the number 72. It's no longer that VLOOKUP formula. And now, if for some reason we want to delete those, we're safe to do it. Now watch what happens in these that do use those named ranges. They're going to get messed up. So formulas, name manager, let's just delete all those just to see what happens. Okay, click, delete, okay, click, delete, okay. And when we close this, see how those don't work anymore because it doesn't know what test 1 is, for example. So now that we understand the basic idea of named ranges, let's get into these database commands. To Excel, database command just means you have a range of data, a named range where your data is, and then these commands can do some pretty fancy things. They can also work pretty simply, but we're going to show you how you can do some additional fancier things with this. Now, these commands all exist in Excel in normal form. Averages, counts, max, min, product, etc. But the D says this is a special version for database commands. Let's click on the Work Here tab and let's get it set up so that we can use these. So here's that same data. So this is data on a little over 1,000 newborn babies and their mothers. So number one, let's name this data range. Let me teach you a couple of shortcut keys you might not be familiar with. Let's just click in the cell A1, hold down the Shift key, and hit the right arrow. Now I'm working on a PC. If you're on a Mac, this might not work the same way. So by holding the Shift and the right arrow, we've selected the entire first row. Now we could hold down the Shift still and start going down, and that'll start selecting the data. But that's going to take a long time with 1,000 rows. So here's another shortcut key. Hold down the Control key and the Shift key, and now hit the down arrow. That goes all the way down to the bottom to where there's no more data. Now that it's all selected, we click over here and we want to name our data. Let's name it Data 1. We could name it anything though, right? Just a simple name, and hit enter. So now if we click the drop down arrow, click Data 1, it shows us what it is. Now to use some of these fancy things, let's copy these column headers here. So I'm highlighting, Control C, Control V. What we're going to use this area for are some filters. And to understand it, you'll just have to wait until we use this. We just want to highlight the row of column names and the very next row below it. And we're going to give that a name. Let's call it Crit1, C-R-I-T-1. Again, we could name this anything. Crit is short for criteria. And this is where we're going to put some rules for filtering our data in case we don't want to look at all of the data at once. You'll see in a second how that works. So Crit1, hit enter. Now let's start using some of these formulas. Suppose we want the average birth weight. So this is the birth weight of babies in ounces. This is parity, first or second child, or first or not first child. Days of gestation, age of the mother, height of the mother in inches, weight of the mother in pounds, and does the mother smoke? So here, average birth weight, and we're going to use that equals D average command. And all of these commands want the same kind of inputs. The first thing it wants is, what database are we looking at? We called that Data 1, comma. What field do we want to look at? And by field, it means what's the name at the top of the column? And you have to have names up there. So let's look at birth weight. And we have to put that in quotation marks, BWT, comma, criteria. Now criteria, we could, again, highlight that same area that we did before, but let's put Crit1 so we don't have to keep highlighting or typing that. Close parentheses. Now what this does is it tells us that the average ounces of newborn babies is about 120 ounces, which is about 7.5 pounds. And that's looking at all of the data, all 1,123 rows of data. But what if we wanted to just look at certain groups? What if we wanted to look at just those babies that were firstborn babies? Here it says that 0 is if it's a first child. So if we just look at first children, put 0 here, and first children look like they're a little bit heavier than the average of all children. If we type 1 there, again, not first children, are just a little lighter than firstborn children. We can just delete that, and now we're looking at all the babies again. Gestation. What if we just wanted to look at all the babies born after a certain number of days? So let's suppose we wanted to omit any babies that were born before, I don't know, 260 days. Maybe that is the definition of a preemie baby, prematurely born. So let's filter here, greater than 206, no, not age, sorry, we're looking at gestation, greater than 260. And if we just look at babies born after 260 days, then again, the birth weight is a little higher than if we include some of these preemie babies who are pretty light. And we could also go and hit F2 and we could edit that. Maybe just babies born after 300 days. Getting heavier and heavier and heavier as that gestation gets longer and longer and longer. What if we just wanted to look at the average birth weight of mothers who were under 20, less than 20 years old? A little bit lower than average, okay? Now, one of the cool things is we don't have to just do one of these. We could say, well, let's look at first children of mothers who are under 20. And when we get both of those, if it's the first baby of mothers who are under 20, look how low that is. That's a lot lower than that 120 average of all mothers. So if it's a first baby of mothers who are under 20, that's a lot lower weight than if it's, say, a second or third or fourth baby of younger mothers. So you can use these filters, these criteria, to just look at different subsets of the data. Pretty cool, eh? Now, if we look at these other database commands, they work pretty similar. We could look at the sum, the standard deviation, the minimum, the maximum, how many there are. So let's work with that count one a little bit just to see how that would work. So since it's a count, we'd say equal dcount. And here it's just going to add up how many are there. And so we'd say data 1. What field are we looking at? Here it actually doesn't matter what we put for field. At least I've never figured out a case where it matters. Let's just put ID. And then criteria, crit 1. And we're going to count how many babies were born that meet certain criteria. And so we can just start here. This tells us since we don't have any criteria here in our criteria box, let me put an outline around our criteria box so we can kind of visualize that a little better. If we don't put any criteria, it's just saying, well, there were 1,223 babies. That's all the babies. How many babies had a mother who smoked? 1. 480, right? So this is just counting up how many times we see these things. How many babies were born to mothers who smoke and the mother was under age 20? 32, right? So we could say, how many babies were born to, say, under 20 and the mother was over 150 pounds? 4. So it looks like these mothers who are under age 20 also don't weigh a lot, and maybe that would have some implications for the birth weight as well. But here we see that birth weight that's showing up is a little higher than average. Interesting. What if we delete that? Slightly below average if we just look at all mothers. If we just look at all mothers, say, that are have a low weight themselves, that's pretty close to the average of everyone. Let's just do one more example of these database commands. Let's do the max. So equals dmax, data 1, field. Let's look at age. And then let's look at criteria, crit 1. So here we're looking at the age variable. Oh, I didn't put age in quotation marks. So if you ever get that error, that's probably what's going on here. So what this is telling us here, let's label this so we can remember what we're doing, maximum age, that the maximum age of mothers who meet these criteria, they're under 20 years old and under 120 pounds, is 19. Well, that makes sense since we've set the max age to be less than 20. Let's delete this. Now, this tells us that we have someone who was 42 years old, who had a baby, who weighed less than 120 pounds, who was in our database. All right? Now let's look at just the maximum age of all mothers. 99. Now, probably there was not actually a mother whose age was 99. Can you guess what that 99 might be telling us? 99 probably means that they don't know the age for that mother. And this is something we need to watch out for if we ever want to calculate average ages. So let's get rid of those 99s and let's just turn them into blank spaces, because that could mess up some of our calculations. Let me show you a quick way that we can do that, and then I'll end this video that's getting pretty long anyway. Let's highlight the columns A through H. We're going to use a filter, data, and then we're going to go to filter and see how that puts a little drop-down box at the top of each column. Let's go to age, and instead of select all, let's just select those 99s. And again, 99 is a common, or 999. These are common things that people will put. It's a nonsensical value to tell you, hey, that's just a marker for a missing value. So let's select those 99s. There were 2 of those. And then let's just delete them. And now they're blank. Now look over here. We see also a weight 99, height 99. This means that we don't know the weight or the height of this mother. So let's go get rid of those missing values. So let's clear the age filter here by select all. And let's get rid of all the 99s for height. Just highlight and hitting the delete key. Let's get rid of that filter. Select all. Weight, same kind of thing. So 999. And let's delete those. Now this filter is actually a great way to look at a quick summary of the values that are there. See here for smoke, we have 0, 1s, and 9s. The 9 is telling us that they don't know whether the person smoked or not, okay? Let's see if there's any weird ones for gestation here. Yeah, so no 999s there for gestation. So they have good data on the babies, but some of the data for the mothers was missing. And again, it's important not to use those if you're looking at averages or maximums or things like that. So the overall maximum age for a woman giving birth in this sample, at least, is 45 years old. But we could also see, okay, what's the maximum age for a woman who gave birth to a baby who, say, was born prematurely? Again, maybe our definition of premature is under 260 days. Then that tells us 41 years old. So that gives you an idea of how these database functions can actually be used. We have to use a named range. We can put in a little area where we can add filters, but Excel calls them criteria. And then that helps us get a feel for different things that might be going on in our data without having to work too hard after we get it set up. So if you have any other topics in Excel that are bothering you and you want me to try to simplify them for you, please let me know. Leave a message in the comment section below, and I'll try to take a look if I can. But I wish you the best of luck in all of your studies, everybody. Have a great day.